My phone buzzed just as I was fastening my seatbelt, and before I even looked, I knew exactly what it would be. I let it vibrate against my palm for a moment longer than necessary, then flipped it face down. For the first time in my life, I wasn't going to rush in and fix what everyone else had broken. My name is Lena. I'm 28 years old, and this Christmas was supposed to be the first one I spent choosing myself instead of saving everyone else. Instead, it became the holiday where my family finally learned what happens when their backup plan stops answering the call. It began with a sound I still hear clearly when I think about it. A sharp inhale. A stunned, disbelieving gasp. My mother stood in the middle of her living room, phone clutched in both hands, staring at the image I had just sent her. Around her, the house was in full meltdown mode. 5 children shouted over one another, their voices colliding like crashing waves. One sobbed because juice had spilled down the front of a brand new holiday dress. Another knocked a box of ornaments onto the floor. The twins were chasing each other through the hallway, laughing and screaming, while my oldest nephew shouted that someone had taken his toy. In the middle of all that noise, my mother whispered almost to herself, "No, this can't be happening." On her screen was a simple picture, a beach chair, a pair of sunglasses, and a boarding pass dated today. What she was really looking at wasn't a photo. It was the collapse of a plan she'd built without ever asking me. For years, my family had relied on one assumption, that I would quietly cancel my life to make theirs easier. That because I was single and didn't have children, my time was flexible, negotiable, and ultimately expendable. Every holiday, every long weekend, every emergency, I became the automatic solution. Watch the kids, stay late, miss the party, skip the trip. No one ever said it outright, but it was understood. And for a long time, I played my part. The moment that finally broke me didn't happen on Christmas. It happened weeks earlier, on a random evening when I was finishing a late report at work. My phone lit up with my mother's name, and something in my chest tightened before I even answered. When she spoke, her voice was overly cheerful, the way it always was right before she asked for something. She told me she had the most wonderful Christmas plan and that I was going to love it. I already knew what that meant. When my mother said she had a plan, it usually meant she had decided something for me. She explained that my sister and my brother were bringing their kids this year and that they really deserved a break. They worked so hard, she said. She talked about adult time and preparations and how everything would be so much easier if I watched the kids for a couple of days. 5 kids, she added lightly as if it were nothing. 2 toddlers, 1 child deep in a dinosaur obsession, and a set of twins who treated furniture like playground equipment. She said I was great with them, that everyone trusted me, that I was the only one who could handle it. I reminded her carefully that I had booked a trip, a solo Christmas getaway I'd been saving for since summer. She laughed just a little and said I could move it. After all, I didn't have a husband or kids to worry about. I was flexible. My family needed me. That word, flexible, landed like a bruise. What she meant was that my life didn't count the same way theirs did. That my job, my exhaustion, my plans were optional. I told her I needed the break. She immediately countered that other people didn't get breaks. She told me to think about the children's faces and asked if I really wanted to disappoint them. The guilt was familiar, well-worn, and effective. It always had been. When I tried to explain that it wasn't about the kids, that it was about being assumed instead of asked, her tone changed. She told me not to be dramatic. She said everyone else had real responsibilities. She said I should be grateful they trusted me. Real responsibilities, as if my life didn't qualify. Something in me shifted then. Not loudly, not explosively. It sharpened. I told her I couldn't promise anything and that I needed to think. She replied that I didn't need to think, that I knew what the right thing was, and that everyone was counting on me. Then she hung up, confident the pressure would work like it always did. For the first time, I didn't rush to rearrange my plans. Instead, I sat there with my phone in my hand and asked myself a question I'd been avoiding for years. What if I didn't save them this time? What if I let them experience the chaos they always handed to me? I called my friend Claire, who recognized my voice instantly and told me my family was being ridiculous before I even finished explaining. She reminded me of every holiday I'd sacrificed, every event I'd missed, every time I'd been volunteered without consent. She said something that stuck with me. They don't treat you like a person, she said. They treat you like a service. That night, the family group chat lit up with festive messages and plans. Right in the middle of it, my mother wrote that I had already agreed to take care of the kids and that she didn't know what they'd do without me. Promised. I stared at that word until it felt unreal. I hadn't promised anything, but I also didn't correct her. Instead, I sent a neutral message saying I'd check my schedule and let them know. On the surface, I still looked cooperative. Inside, I was done. The next day, I confirmed my booking. The beach rental. December 23rd to 27th. The exact days they wanted me tied to their couch with 5 kids. When my mother called again and told me she'd already told everyone I would do it, I reminded her I hadn't said yes. She said I hadn't said no either and accused me of making things difficult. I realized then that no amount of warning would ever be enough for people who only hear what benefits them. I decided I wouldn't give them what they never gave me, consideration. I stopped explaining. I stopped justifying. I packed my suitcase and waited. On Christmas Eve morning, I woke up without messages about snacks or nap schedules. I made coffee, got dressed, and opened the group chat one last time. My mother was still telling everyone I'd be there the next day. "Thank goodness for me," she wrote. "They'd be lost without me." I opened a private chat and sent a single message saying I had never agreed and that I'd be out of town. I wished her a good holiday and hit send before I could second-guess myself. The reaction was immediate. Accusations, guilt, panic. I sent a photo of my boarding pass and my packed suitcase. I told her I wasn't changing my mind. I put my phone on silent and walked out the door. At the airport, the noise felt distant, manageable. When I finally checked my phone again, the family chat was unraveling. Confusion turned into arguments. For once, the frustration wasn't directed at me. It was directed at the person who had made promises she couldn't keep. My mother called, frantic, surrounded by noise and crying children. She accused me of choosing a trip over my family. I told her I was choosing not to be taken for granted. When she fell silent, I knew something had finally landed. I boarded the plane and turned on airplane mode. The last thing I saw was a photo in the group chat. 5 kids in mismatched pajamas. My mother in the background, hand over her mouth, eyes wide. Even through the screen, I could hear the words she'd whispered earlier. "This can't be happening." But it was happening, and for the first time, I didn't rush back to make it easier. I chose myself. When the plane finally lifted off the runway, the vibration under my feet felt like a line being physically cut. As the city shrank beneath the clouds, something inside me loosened for the first time in years. I rested my head back and closed my eyes, expecting guilt to flood in like it always did. It didn't. Instead, there was a strange, unfamiliar quiet. Not relief exactly, more like space. Space I hadn't realized had been missing from my life. The moment we landed, my phone buzzed nonstop as airplane mode switched off. Notifications stacked so fast the screen lagged. Missed calls, voicemails, dozens of messages in the family group chat. For a second, my thumb hovered, ready to mute everything and disappear into the sound of waves and seagulls. I had earned that peace. But another part of me, the part that had always been expected to clean up messes, wanted to see what happened when I didn't. So I opened the chat. It read like a slow unraveling. At first, confusion. "Wait, Lena isn't coming. I thought this was handled weeks ago." Then irritation. "We planned around this. Mom, you said she agreed." And finally, frustration that had nothing to do with me. For once, the spotlight wasn't on my supposed selfishness. It was on the person who had made promises for someone else's time. My mother kept repeating the same line. She changed her mind at the last minute. Each time I read it, something tightened in my chest. I hadn't changed my mind. I had simply stopped ignoring it. A video call came through, my mother again. I answered not out of obligation but curiosity. Her face filled the screen, flushed and frantic, hair pulled back too tightly. Behind her, the house looked destroyed, wrapping paper everywhere, toys scattered, a toddler crying on the floor while another child tugged at her sleeve. The noise was overwhelming even through the phone. She didn't greet me. She went straight to accusation. She said I had embarrassed her, that everyone was stressed. That she didn't know how to handle all of this. She asked how I could do this to her. I listened without interrupting, something I had never done before. When she finally paused to take a breath, I spoke calmly. I told her I had warned her weeks ago, that she chose not to hear me, that planning an entire holiday around my unpaid labor without my consent was not my responsibility to fix. Her eyes flicked away from the camera. I could tell she wasn't used to this version of me, the one that did fold, the one that didn't rush to soothe. She said family makes sacrifices. I asked why I was always the only one expected to make them. She said she never meant to hurt me. I told her intent didn't erase impact. The silence that followed was thick, broken only by a child yelling in the background. Then she whispered, almost to herself, "I don't know how we'll manage." And for the first time, I didn't offer a solution. I ended the call gently, not angrily, not dramatically, just firmly. I told her I loved her and hoped they figured it out. Then I hung up. My hands were shaking, but there was no regret, just a deep, steady certainty that something irreversible had happened. I had crossed a line I couldn't uncross, and strangely, that felt like freedom. The beach was everything I had imagined. Quiet mornings, long walks along the shore, coffee with no interruptions. No one asking me to be responsible for anything but myself. At first, my body didn't know how to handle it. I kept expecting my phone to buzz with demands. I kept glancing at it, waiting for the pull of obligation. But as the days passed, that reflex softened. I slept better than I had in years. I laughed with strangers. I read entire chapters of books, without stopping mid-page, to solve someone else's problem. Meanwhile, back home, things shifted. I didn't know all the details right away. I learned them slowly, piece by piece, through messages and voice notes that trickled in over the following days. My sister had canceled her dinner reservation. My brother had shown up late and irritated. Arguments broke out. Someone complained that they never got a break. Someone else snapped that maybe they should have hired a sitter. And somewhere in the middle of it all, a truth surfaced that had been buried under years of convenience. Without me there to absorb the stress, it had to land somewhere else. On the third day of my trip, I received a message from my sister. Not angry, not accusatory, just tired. She said she hadn't realized how much work 5 kids really were. She said she thought Mom exaggerated when she said I handled everything easily. She didn't apologize outright, but there was something close to it between the lines, an acknowledgement. It wasn't everything, but it was something. My brother didn't message at all, which, in its own way, said plenty. My mother waited until the day after Christmas to reach out again. This time, there was no accusation, just a short text asking if we could talk when I got back. I stared at it for a long time before replying that we could. Not because I felt obligated, but because I finally felt strong enough to have that conversation without losing myself in it. When I returned home, the air felt different. Heavier, maybe, but also more honest. I went to my mother's house a few days later. The decorations were still up, but something about them felt off. Less festive, more tired. She looked older somehow, or maybe I was just seeing her more clearly. We sat at the kitchen table where so many silent expectations had been placed on me over the years. She started by saying Christmas had been hard. I nodded. She said she hadn't realized how much she leaned on me. I waited. She said she thought I didn't mind because I never said no. That stung, but it was also true. I told her that not saying no wasn't the same as saying yes. That being quiet wasn't consent, that I had learned very young that my needs came last, and I was tired of living that way. She cried, not loudly, not theatrically, just quietly wiping her eyes with a napkin. She said she was afraid of losing control, afraid of disappointing everyone. Afraid that if she didn't hold everything together, it would all fall apart. I told her it wasn't my job to be the glue. That love shouldn't require self-erasure. That I could still care about my family without sacrificing myself every time. The conversation didn't fix everything. There were no grand apologies, no sudden transformations, but something shifted. The assumptions were cracked. The unspoken rule that I would always be available was finally spoken aloud and challenged. In the months that followed, the requests didn't stop entirely, but they changed. People asked instead of assigned. Sometimes I said yes. Sometimes I didn't. And when I didn't, the world didn't end. Plans adjusted. Other solutions appeared. It turned out I was never the only option. I was just the easiest one. That Christmas didn't make me the villain my family feared. It made me visible. And visibility, I learned, is uncomfortable for people who benefit from your silence. I still think about that moment sometimes. My mother standing there, phone in her hand, surrounded by chaos, whispering, "This can't be happening." Because in that moment, something wasn't happening anymore. The pattern, the expectation, the quiet sacrifice. And something else was happening instead. I was choosing myself. In the weeks after that conversation, I noticed changes not just in my family, but in myself. The guilt that used to sit heavy in my chest whenever I chose my own needs began to lose its grip. It didn't disappear overnight, but it softened. Each time I said no without offering a long explanation, each time I resisted the urge to over-justify my choices, I felt a little stronger. I realized how deeply I had been conditioned to believe that my worth was tied to how useful I was to others. There were awkward moments, of course. Family gatherings felt different, quieter. People hesitated before making assumptions. My mother caught herself mid-sentence more than once, stopping before volunteering me for something. Sometimes she would look at me with a mix of uncertainty and something else I hadn't seen before, respect. Not complete, not perfect, but real enough to notice. And that alone told me I hadn't imagined how lopsided things had been before. One afternoon, months later, my sister called me unexpectedly. Her voice sounded tired but honest. She told me she finally understood why I had needed that trip so badly. She said there were moments during the holiday when she'd felt overwhelmed and thought about how I used to handle everything without complaint. "I don't know how you did it," she admitted. I told her the truth. I did it because I thought I had to, because no one ever gave me permission not to. The line went quiet for a moment before she said, "I should have asked you, I'm sorry." It wasn't a dramatic apology, but it was sincere, and it mattered. What surprised me most was how that single decision rippled outward into the rest of my life. At work, I stopped staying late just to be agreeable. With friends, I became more honest about my limits. I realized how often I had been shrinking myself everywhere, not just at home. Saying no in one place made it easier to say no in others. It was like a muscle I had never been allowed to use, finally strengthening with practice. Sometimes, late at night, I still replay that Christmas in my head. The moment I sent that message, the sound of my mother's voice cracking, the image of those 5 kids in mismatched pajamas. And for a split second, the old reflex kicks in, the urge to fix, to apologize, to make it right. But then I remember something important. It was never broken because of me. It was broken because of expectations that no one questioned for too long. I didn't stop loving my family that Christmas. I just stopped disappearing for them. And in doing so, I gave them something they'd never had before, the chance to see me as a whole person, not a role they could assign. So if you're the one everyone relies on, the one whose plans are always considered flexible, the one who's told you'll understand, one day, when you have a family of your own, hear this. You don't need to earn rest. You don't need permission to choose yourself. And you don't have to wait for a breaking point to set a boundary. Sometimes, the most loving thing you can do is step back and let the people who depend on you learn how to stand without you. That Christmas, for the first time in my life, I didn't save anyone else. I saved myself. Even now, when the holidays roll around, I feel that familiar tug of expectation trying to creep back in. A casual comment here, a half-joking assumption there. Old habits don't vanish just because they've been named. But the difference is, I notice them now. I pause. I check in with myself before responding. And more often than not, I choose honesty over automatic compliance. Last Christmas, a year after the trip that changed everything, my mother asked instead of assumed. She asked if I would be around. She asked what my plans were. It wasn't perfect, and it wasn't dramatic, but it was progress. I told her what I could do and what I couldn't, and for the first time, the conversation didn't end in tension or guilt. It ended in clarity. What I've learned is this: boundaries don't destroy families. Silence does. Resentment does. Years of swallowing your needs until they harden into something bitter does. Speaking up may feel like selfishness to people who benefited from your silence, but that doesn't make it wrong. I don't regret the beach, the plane ticket, or the moment I chose myself over expectation. I regret only how long it took me to believe I was allowed to. If this story sounds familiar, if you're the one everyone leans on while forgetting you need rest too, let this be your reminder. You don't have to wait for permission. You don't have to justify your life. Sometimes, choosing yourself isn't an act of rebellion. It's an act of survival.